This podcast is brought to you by Flipper, a marketplace to buy and sell websites, stores, and digital real estate. Plot your own path. Become a boss by buying a small online business at Flipper. Simply visit flipper.com/techtalks for a free consultation and 50% off fees. That's FLIPPA, flipper.com/techtalks. If you do visit, let me know how you get on. But now, let's get the show started.
Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where we don't just explore how technology is transforming multiple industries and giving real-world examples of how it's solving problems every day, but also the human stories behind them and the tech careers. So today we have the AtScale Co-founder, Sarah Gerweck, on the podcast. And prior to AtScale, Sarah was lead architect at Yahoo, where she was responsible for the design and deployment and management of the company's advertising insights product, including the world's largest analysis service deployment. So I think it's fair to say she knows her stuff. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to California so we can speak with Sarah about the problem and how she and AtScale are trying to solve it. And of course, the story behind it all. So let's get her on the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Sarah. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Sarah Gerweck. I live in San Mateo, which is just south of San Francisco. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, which is just up the coast, and then came to the San Francisco Bay Area to study math and physics at UC Berkeley. After my time at university, I, joined started getting involved in the tech world in a combination of small companies and large companies. My technical background at this point is in distributed systems, data analytics, and computer languages. And for the last 7 years or so, I'm a co-founder and the CTO of AtScale, which is a data analytics company focusing on business intelligence, big data, and sort of enterprise data awareness.
Well, I'm excited to get you on the podcast today to learn more about AtScale. But before we do talk about that, something I'd love to do on this podcast is learn a little bit more about the guest journey and where you've come from and your career in technology. So when I did a bit of research on you, I quickly learned that you were the lead architect at Yahoo, where your team designed and deployed and managed the world's largest Microsoft analysis service cube. So can you tell me a little bit more about your journey in tech?
Yeah. So, out of college, I started out as a very early employee in a startup called Presedia, which ultimately became the technology behind both Adobe Presenter and Adobe Connect today after many, many iterations. From there, I spent some time at a couple other startups, and then also got experience being at some larger companies. When we got brought into Macromedia at the time, which was larger before it was part of Adobe, and also spent some time at Axiom working on distributed systems, and ultimately followed one of my co-founders at AtScale, Dave Mariani, into the data and analytics group at Yahoo, which was really a fantastic opportunity to see sort of the scale of modern data. If you think about, unfortunately, Yahoo doesn't exist in the form that it did at the time. But if you think about something like Yahoo.com, just the number of interactions they had every day with users and advertisements and the way that they connected those together, the size of data was just mind-boggling. It was really a great opportunity to see sort of how all these things that I had studied in the past in my professional work in terms of distributed systems, data and analytics were really being brought into a new wave of sort of decision making around what companies could do. And so, it was all about how can we give users the best experience possible How can we show them the most relevant content that they're going to want to interact with and share? And also, how can we make sure that that's paired with highly relevant, personalized advertising that's actually going to get people interested? There's no point in showing somebody an advertisement that just makes them roll their eyes and say, yeah, whatever. You want to show them an advertisement that's going to be relevant to them in a way and a time and place that's relevant to them. And that was really the mandate of our group at Yahoo, was to figure out how do we show people the best content that's going to be relevant to them, that they're going to interact with, both in terms of, the stories that we would write or the promotions we would connect people with, but also which advertiser should we be connecting them with. And so, we had, I'm sure many of your listeners know, at Yahoo, a separate group actually invented the Hadoop technology to solve a lot of the problems of dealing with massive amounts of data that just, the world was starting to scale quite rapidly in terms of what people were dealing with. And so, our job was to sort of take all that and make it intelligible to non-technical users. So that included, as you mentioned, we had the world's largest Microsoft Analysis Services cube, so that we could boil down a lot of the information about how advertising and stories were performing in ways that account managers and writers could use in simple technology like Excel within the company. And then we also had a number of products for advertisers that would allow them to see with very low latency, within an hour or two of when they placed an advertisement on, a certain segment of Yahoo Sports or, on the Yahoo Fantasy Football or whatever it was, we could see within a couple of hours, they could see which demographics that was doing well with, which areas of the world or the country that was doing well with. And we actually built a product that we exposed to anybody who was on one of our ad exchanges that would allow them to get those low latency analytics on the huge amount of data that was flowing through Yahoo.
A fantastic career in tech. But I'm curious, can you remember the spark that ignited your passion for technology and what put you on this path?
Yeah. So, I was always interested in, learning new things, solving puzzles, and particularly, have a sort of natural inclination to sort of want to understand how systems fit together and interact. I was the kind of child who would take apart my toys to see how they worked. And, as the sort of personal computers became more capable and more affordable, it quickly became quite apparent to me that there was this sort of whole new world to explore in what was happening in computing. It's sort of one of the, I think, amazing things about technology and software in particular is that it's in a sense only really limited by your imagination and the sort of constructions that you can build that, unlike other engineering disciplines, like say, if you're building a bridge, there's a lot of constraints placed on you by the strength of the materials that are available, the force of gravity, the weight of a car, the way that materials wear down over time. There's a lot of constraints that hem you in. But with technology, we have some of those, the amount of computing power that's available, or the cycles per second, or the amount of RAM you have available. But other than some very basic constraints on just how fast you can do things or how much you can do at once, it's sort of like one of my other early interests and what I studied primarily in college, which was mathematics, where it's almost like building cities out of pure reason. As computing has evolved and we start to look to the cloud, even those constraints of, well, you can only get this many cycles per second, or you can only get this much RAM, these are largely erased now by commodity computing. So it's sort of it's sort of the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do with technology you're only limited by your creativity and your sort of technical ability to execute on that creativity, which is really exciting and can be quite thrilling at times.
Absolutely. And from there, of course, you went on to co-found AtScale, and here in 2020, you're the CTO at the company. But can you share the story behind the company and the problems that you set out to solve from the very beginning?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned at Yahoo, Dave Mariani, one of my co-founders, and I had worked together there and sort of really had a great opportunity to see the state of the art of business intelligence. We had contracts with all the different vendors. We had, hundreds of engineers working on all the different open source technologies that were out there. And what we found was that although we could do a lot, that when we started looking at the sort of scope of data that we now had available coming out of our, the distributed Hadoop clusters that we were building at the time in Yahoo to process all the different fine-grained data, we found that, the existing tools just were built in an era that didn't quite anticipate what people wanted to do with data anymore. And so, we found ourselves constantly up against things that, it seems like generating this report should be easy. It seems like getting this insight should be easy. It seems like feeding this data to our data scientists should be easy. Because, the consensus at the time was that sort of reporting and OLAP and analytics were sort of solved problems since the 1990s. And that just wasn't true anymore. Data had changed. Data was much, much larger. The level of sophistication of analysis that people wanted was getting much, much deeper. The way that data was stored was quickly changing as the world moved to, at the time, private clouds with services like Hadoop that would allow you to land all of your data directly out of your servers or your pipelines or your ad exchanges. And people wanted access to that data quickly. They didn't want to wait for a daily ETL process or a monthly cube rebuild. They didn't want to then be restricted to just those features that you had sort of loaded out so that it could fit into the sort of single node monolithic technologies that could process that data into reporting. And so we actually had a team inside Yahoo who was just responsible for when somebody had a question that couldn't be answered by the sort of canned data systems that could fit into these older analytics technologies. They would actually go and write software just to answer this one question one time and then feed the data to the data scientists or feed the data to the executives who were piloting a new program or whatever the case was. And it just seemed like the technology had changed and the amount of data had changed and the way people were using that data had all changed. But the technology people were using to access that data and make it intelligible hadn't really caught up with it yet. And we found that, even as a technology company like Yahoo, with, as I said, we had hundreds of engineers in the analytics group and many thousands of engineers in the company. It was way too hard to do to answer what seemed like natural questions. If it was that hard for us, we could only imagine that it was even harder for technically sophisticated companies that were not tech companies. If you looked at somebody in retail or finance or healthcare or any one of a number of other sectors that want to know what's going on in their business, but don't see themselves as technology companies that are primarily about hiring as many smart engineers as they can. And so, we had a series of meetings over coffee in Mountain View, and just the more we talked about it, the more obvious it seemed that, the world had changed, but the markets hadn't quite noticed yet. And the time was right in terms of the technology to sort of build a new solution on a new set of architectures that could deal with these changes. And it just seemed like we were the right people in the right place at the right time, that we'd lived the problem and had a sort of unique perspective on how to chart a course forward.
I love what you've done there. Just to bring everything to life, do you have any use cases or maybe examples of how AtScale's intelligent data virtualization platform is making a real difference to businesses here in 2020 and beyond, of course?
Yeah, I can give you, a couple of our customers that, I think your listeners will be familiar with. So, one of our customers is Toyota, the car company, and they use our software to sort of get insights into their supply chain. And that doesn't just mean here's how much we pay for each part. Those are that's what people might have been doing, again, back in the 1990s, is building a report on here's all the different parts we have and here's how much we pay for it. But what Toyota wants to do is be able to look holistically at all of their suppliers, all of the, virtually countless different parts, although AtScale could count them for you, that each of those suppliers provides, and see, not just how much it costs, but, how much time does it spend being integrated? What is the performance of that part over time? What is the reliability? How do these use of different parts impact recall rates? How do suppliers in aggregate, compare with other suppliers? So there's lots of different decisions that take place in the manufacturing of a complex product like a car. And ultimately, what you want to do is build that car at a reasonable price, but also make sure that it's highly reliable and produces good customer satisfaction and repeat business. And so Toyota can take all these different signals they get from customer satisfaction surveys, from pricing information, from inventory information, from manufacturing instrumentation, and they can slice across all this information and integrate all this heterogeneous data and get insights into the entire process of building a car. So another large customer of ours is Wayfair, which is the sort of online home furnishing, home supplies retailer. And they're really a fascinating company in that they're really modern and they're great at measuring everything. So, they're primarily an online retailer. So, like a web presence company, they have a lot of data about how do users navigate their site. What is it? Where do they come in? What do they click? What do they search for? How do they respond to different search results? How do they navigate from there? How many clicks does it take them to buy? How often do they add something to a cart and then leave it out? How does the presentation of the page affect how they respond to what they see? How much are different types of users weighing reputation versus price versus the pictures they see versus feature lists? So that's one side of what they're doing. Another side of that is, how then when customers do make purchases, what is their experience with those? Which manufacturers or suppliers are they most happy with? Are there certain product lines or categories of products that are going to have higher return rates or negative review rates? How do different aspects of how long it takes to get the product, how the product was sold to them, how do those things impact customer satisfaction? And then, like much of the world, they have also to look at marketing and advertising concerns and how those feed into all of these different metrics of customer satisfaction, customer spending, and expenses to the company. So through our system, they can integrate all these different pieces of data. And again, like Toyota, get a holistic view of what's happening in their business, of what costs them money, what makes them money, and sort of which things help their reputation, which things hurt their reputation, which things are going to create good customer behaviors, bad customer behaviors, which suppliers are doing well, which suppliers are maybe need to be improved. So there's, all the questions that you might want to ask as a business are things that if you can measure those things, you can get insights into them, which is really the only way, I think, to run a large modern business like Wayfair that has, thousands and thousands of offerings and many different suppliers and sort of anonymous internet customers that you have to measure, and you have to be able to aggregate, and you have to be able to look across different signals to find the truth.
I've had countless emails from listeners over the last few weeks talking about their fears and concerns around job security, while also seeing their interest rates on their savings drop considerably. And as a result, many are beginning to look at how they can invest in their future in an uncertain time. Could digital assets be the answer? Now, you might remember that I spoke to Blake Hutchinson, CEO at Flipper, on episode 1194 about how to buy digital assets and websites. In a nutshell, Flipper is a marketplace that you can buy and sell websites, stores, and digital real estate that are just ready to go. So if you do have dreams of running your own successful online business, or perhaps you're looking to exit your existing online business, my friends at Flipper can help you buy and sell. So if you're interested and want to find out more, please visit flipper.com/techtalks. That's FLIPPA.com/techtalks for a free consultation and also 50% off all fees. But now, back to the interview. And you, of course, have been instrumental in the design and development of AtScale's platform there, and also helped establish the company's global presence. But a question I've got to ask is, what has been the biggest challenges and how have you overcome them? And I suspect that some of them might be this year, because it's a year that's challenging for everyone. But what stands out for you?
Yeah, so technically, I think the challenge for any startup is figuring out how to give yourself enough flexibility technically to sort of evolve as the company grows, because you're starting with a blank page, as an empty editor in a source code control system, and you're building these frameworks. And like I mentioned earlier, in software in particular, it's sort of the limits are your imagination, but there's also a limit in terms of how much time you have, how much code you can write, how much code you can maintain. So you need to have the right convictions. And, early on in the company, there were a lot of, heated conversations about what we were and perhaps more importantly, what we weren't trying to solve as a company, so that we could sort of lay a foundation of here's where we need to be flexible to be able to evolve as we learn more about the market and as the technology changes, because it was clear from the beginning that, technology was changing rapidly in this space. And here's what we don't need to change. So an example of that is, early on, the company was very focused on Hadoop, because that was the sort of big data technology at the time, and that was what was really transforming enterprise data. But, we felt it was important to give ourselves the flexibility to evolve as things changed in that space. So, if Hadoop ended up fading out and people went back to the traditional Oracles and Teradatas, or if more new technologies came along to sort of bring a next generation. And that latter is what we've seen, especially as we see the pivot to cloud and the rise of things like Snowflake and BigQuery and, Microsoft Azure, that, the space continues to evolve. So, technically, I think a lot of thought went into how can we be flexible enough to evolve as the company changes and the market changes, but specific enough that we're not just building, a widget machine that can widget away any problem, because you could spend the next 1,000 years on that and get nowhere. Organizationally, I think a company is very different at 5 people than it is at, 100 people. And so really getting the culture right and figuring out how to get the right structures in place to, solve the problems that you have at that moment as a company that, I think every 6 months a startup is almost a new company. And you need to be able to continue to change as your situation changes, as the market changes, as the status of your investors changes, as your employee count changes, as your even individual employees change. When you're particularly in the sort of the first 50 people, every employee that joins the company and leaves the company makes a huge difference on the company culture. So, and I think that continues to this day. So figuring out how to get the right culture and the right structures to get everybody pointed in the same direction. And, personally, I think along the same vein, it's like, as I said, every 6 months, it's really a new job at a new company. So figuring out how to constantly, have my eyes and ears open to what's going on, and understanding where we're at today, and not just sort of getting stuck in, here's what worked 3 years ago, because 3 years ago is an eternity in the life of a startup.
And here in 2020, of course, faster data-driven business decision-making seems to be the top of so many wish lists for leaders at the moment. And I'm curious, in a post-pandemic world, is there a real desire for modernising business intelligence and reporting and bringing it to life through visualization? Is that something that you're seeing?
Oh, most definitely. So, I think the world has changed dramatically in the last 6 months of this year. It's become far more distributed than it was. The whole world has sort of gotten good at remote work, dealing with remote resources that, other than those jobs that must be done in person, most of the world has been on sort of work from home orders. And so that's, I think, fundamentally and probably permanently changed some of the ways that enterprises operate. And I think any predictions about the future of the world are bound to be wrong in some way, but I think we'll see that some of the things that have been happening as we've enabled employees to work remotely and figured out how to get better at collaborating and asynchronous work and telepresence work, all those things have very different requirements in terms of management structures, in terms of IT structures. And so I think we'll continue to see a lot of shift to sort of cloud-based and software as a service, infrastructure as a service type technologies. Whether these are sort of private clouds or public clouds, we have seen a lot of just, if all your employees are at home, now all of a sudden you have to be able to support, however many employees you have all signing into the VPN at once and all wanting to, access remote resources at once and all wanting to have big, Zoom meetings or Google Hangouts or whatever technology you use. And I think, it also poses new challenges for management in terms of like, you have to be much smarter about how you track performance when you can't just see everybody in the same location the same way that you could in the past or in some finite number of locations. So, all these things lead to more distributed decision-making, which leads to the need for more insight into your data. You need to get smarter about what you measure, and you need to have improved ability to measure those things. And I think that cuts across the entire business. And of course, given the large amount of uncertainty in the world right now, just around reopenings and the timelines for vaccines and, R0 rates of viruses and all the other things we hear about on a daily basis that we have no real control over, or only very indirect control. I think every business is looking carefully at how do we make sure that we're positioned to survive this. And that means, how do we control our costs? How do we leverage our strengths? How do we shore up our weaknesses to sort of survive the storm and come out stronger? And more data and more insight into how your business operates and what works and what doesn't can only help there. And that's what we've been seeing in the market.
And as someone that's enjoyed a hugely successful career in tech, can I ask that you share your experience as a female founder and executive in the tech industry? And have you seen attitudes change for the better over the years? Because we've all heard about the horrendous problems over the years, but have you seen that change at all?
I have. I've never experienced a lot of sort of outright in-your-face discrimination. Certainly, I've heard comments about different levels of ability and personalities and things like that. Those things happen. They were certainly much more common, a a decade or two ago than they are today. So I do think there's been progress, but I think there's also still a long way to go. There may be less outright discrimination, although you hear stories about, certain startups in the Valley that had very sort of what's called the programmer culture. And, hopefully that's a thing of the past now. But, I think there's still in all of us a large set of implicit biases. And, we know the things that we've been exposed to. We tend to like the people who are similar to us, that we understand their shared reference point. And I think these are a lot harder problems to overcome. And the way I think the only way that really happens is through representation and exposure. So, until we have relatively even levels of men and women in technology, I think we'll continue to see some challenges faced by women. And the same goes for other for minorities and other groups that, I think people start to understand what they're exposed to, what they spend time around. It's sometimes challenging to be the only female in the room, or to feel like, there's a little bit of a cultural club that you're not part of. But I think, being in that room is part of what changes the culture and gets people to understand how to be more inclusive. Because I don't think there's a lot of bad intent out there. There's just people who don't have the perspective of having worked with, a female executive in technology, or, a minority programmer, or whatever it might be. I think, the more exposure people have, and the more we have sort of proportional representation, the more the tech world looks like the world at large, the more people will understand. And one other thing I'd mention is, I think one of the challenges is the sort of myth of meritocracy that does sort of permeate technology. And although meritocracy is a great goal in any organization, it also gives you a lot of, if you don't put some structure around it, and you don't sort of manage your biases and look carefully at what you're deciding has merit, there's been a lot of good studies to indicate that, thinking you have a meritocracy and saying we're going to be meritocratic can actually do more harm, because it can become a cover for people to, again, unintentionally and implicitly, promote the person who reminds them of themselves when they were younger, because that's the person who has a similar background and a similar perspective on the world. So there's a lot of ways in which bias can sort of creep into decisions unintentionally. And I think that's the primary challenge today, is to sort of move beyond that. And I think, it will take time, but there certainly has been progress.
And it has been a challenging year, like we said a few moments ago. But what is your primary focus for the rest of 2020 and beyond?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we see a lot of movement to cloud technology as people are getting into more distributed work environments, and looking at what that means for their IT organizations and for their operational organizations. And we think AtScale is really uniquely positioned to help customers continue that journey into cloud-based architectures. We can do that, in a few ways, right? So one is, we're sort of, we have a lot of technology to help people accelerate the movement from, say, an on-premise data warehouse to a cloud-based data warehouse. We can do this in ways that not only through our semantic layer can we sort of help people make that movement happen, we can also minimize the disruption and do that at the same time that we're alleviating some of the performance and latency constraints that sometimes come with the move from having everybody be on-premise in the same location as the data to having people be spread around the world with maybe the data in a remote location. We can also one of the challenges as companies move to the cloud is making sure they control costs, because those costs can be more variable in a metered environment, like an AWS or a Google Cloud or a Microsoft Azure. And so, our acceleration and autonomous data engineering technologies can help people reduce their cloud spend costs by up to 90%, which should go a long way towards isolating people from, one of the potential pitfalls of the cloud, which is that it's easy to spend money because as long as your credit card's good, they'll sell you more compute. And lastly, we think, AtScale's position is unique in that we are from day one designed for heterogeneous environments. So, we're not married to, we'll work if all your data is in Google Compute Cloud, or if all your data is in AWS, or all your data is in Azure, or all your data is on-prem. Customers can mix and match and try out different things, which gives them the ability to continue to evolve as their situation evolves, and also to make a gradual transition, right? So we're not going to require you to move all your data in one day. We can use our virtualization technology to have some of your data continue to be on premise. Maybe some of it's in one cloud, some of it's in another cloud. So you're not beholden and locked into any one technical choice. So we think, the company's well positioned, and we're doing a lot of additional work in 2020 to build out even more of our story around what we can offer people as they continue their journey into a cloud-based architecture.
Well, a huge thank you for taking the time to come and speak with me today. I've loved hearing your story and the great work that you're doing. But for anyone listening, and especially any business leaders listening that would like to find out more information about you guys and the work that you're doing, can you just point them in the direction of where to find you online, and also how they can contact your team if they have any questions?
Yeah, so we're AtScale. It's AtScale. You can find us at atscale.com. There are, contact links there. If you want to reach out to me personally, I'm Sarah Gerweck. That's Gerweck, and you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter.
Fantastic. Well, I'll add all those links to the blog post and the show notes that will accompany this podcast episode. But more than anything, just a genuine thank you for me for, like I said, taking the time to come on here and share your story. And hopefully we can get you back on later on in the year, find out how things are moving for you. But more than anything, just thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Neil. And I'd love to come back.
As more enterprises embrace cloud transformation, IT and data teams face increased pressure to harness the power of data and analytics for business intelligence. Hybrid cloud and multi-cloud strategies are a big key to data analytics now, and new data regulations and cybersecurity vulnerabilities are all just creating roadblocks for IT teams that are looking to use data for business intelligence. And for these reasons alone, data virtualization and data governance are huge priorities here in 2020. But I also love Sarah's journey in tech too, her career, and how she has remained remarkably humble despite her phenomenal success. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, and you know the drill by now. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My social channels and 1,200 episodes and interviews can all be found on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. And also a bit of news. Not only do I host this daily tech podcast, I now host 2 other podcasts. I host a podcast with Citrix, which I know many of you know out there, but I've also got a new podcast out called Switched On Thinking with Netgear. So add that to your feeds too. And you'll find the links on my website. But enough from me. Just a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.